Welcome back to Indy 500 month, and the premise of today's video is very simple and straightforward. I will be giving you my prediction of who will be the 33 starters in the 103rd running of the Indianapolis 500. And not only that, I will also be telling you the 3 drivers I think will be going home after getting bumped from the field in qualifying. As we know, there are no locked-in spots, and anyone could possibly go home, and I think at least one of my choices will bring a lot of discussion and a lot of debate. I will also be giving you the pole position speed I think will be achieved this year, as well as the slowest speed in the field, ordinarily known as the bump speed. But this video isn't just about me. I want to hear from you too. I almost want to turn this, and I'm surprised this hasn't happened, I want to turn Indy 500 qualifying into something akin to the NCAA tournament. You know, when everybody fills out their brackets before the tournament begins, trying to predict who, when, where, how some of the people will show up. What kind of upsets will we see? Will people qualify higher? Will people qualify lower? Who will get bumped? I want you down in the comments right now or across social media, if you don't have a YouTube account, to give me your fastest 33. In order, of course, the Indy 500 is 11 rows of 3, so 3 drivers per each row on the grid. And of course, there will also be 3 drivers who will not make each of your starting grids. I am fascinated to see what the comments section comes up with. But first, let me give you my 33 starters to this year's Indianapolis 500 here on Indy 500 month. So we will start from row 1 and head all the way back to the DNQ, did not qualify drivers. And before we get to the pole sitter, what will he qualify at? And I think it'll be 230.074 miles per hour. And that's a little bit specific. You don't have to get quite that specific with your predictions. But I do believe the pole speed will go up from last year. We did see Ed Carpenter, who was the pole sitter last year, prove that 230 mile an hour laps are capable or can be possible with this current universal aero kit on the Dallara DW12 chassis, and with the engine development as well as track and chassis developments that the teams will have made in the offseason. I think 230 miles per hour as an average is about right. I don't think they'll go much faster than that. Certainly won't eclipse the 232 mile per hour DW12 track record that Scott Dixon set in 2017, and absolutely will not eclipse Arie Luyendyk's outright track record at somewhere like 236.9 miles per hour. So what of my front row? Well, I think many people are going to think it's a boring prediction, but on the pole, picking up where he left off last year, I think Will Power is going to get the pole position. I think he's going to be driving with a lot of confidence this year with his newfound Indy 500 win and a Borg Warner trophy. Starting alongside him in the middle of the front row, I think it's going to be Josef Newgarden. Josef Newgarden has been driving absolutely stellarly this year, and I think the Penske-Chevy combination is going to be the one to have once again this year. In fact, you're going to see a lot of Chevys in these first couple of rows because I believe that they still have the strongest combination. The question, of course, later on in the month is whether or not they're fast and fragile. And starting along on the outside of the front row, this may be a bit controversial, but it's going to be Ed Carpenter. I know he was the pole sitter last year, and historically speaking, Ed will back up his pole positions with another pole position. He usually qualifies 2 in a row every time he does the pole or wins the pole position. And he's definitely one of the best qualifiers at Indianapolis, probably in the history. But he's lost some sponsorship after this year or last year. He does not have Fuzzy's Vodka anymore. He's got the preferred freezer on the side. And I just have a feeling that the Ed Carpenter cars, while they are going to be probably the second best combination to have, I still think the Penskes are going to come out on top. But Ed's such a good qualifier, I still am going to rank him on the front row. Row 2 on my mock grid will see on the inside Simon Pagenaud. Now this may be another controversial pick to put him that far back. Pagenaud is ordinarily a very good qualifier at Indianapolis, more often than not qualifying on the front row, especially when he's with Penske. It just feels like Pagenaud doesn't quite have it this year in relation to his teammates. I've kind of ranked him in the middle of the Penske guys for that reason, and that reason alone. I'm not sure he's going to factor into the race either. So inside row 2 is where Pagenaud will be. Middle of row 2, I've got Spencer Pigot, second of the Ed Carpenter Racing cars. He was fast during the test. He was a Fast 9 contender last year. Again, I think the Ed Carpenter Racing cars are some of the best at Indianapolis, and I think all of those cars are going to be right up at the front. And on the outside, we've got the first of the Honda contenders, and I may have ranked this a little too high, but 2017 winner Takuma Sato. He showed a lot of speed at the Indy 500 test, and it certainly looks like Takuma Sato, and I believe they have a new engineer at the Rahal team, have really hit a sweet spot. And if there is going to be a Honda that high up the field, I think it's going to be Sato, but I think that's a bit of a risky pick, especially that high up in the Fast 9. Row 3 is essentially exactly the same as it was in 2018. That may be the most stupid pick I have in this entire video because of how unlikely it would be for for history to repeat itself quite this way. But anyway, on the inside of row 3, I've got Ed Jones in the Scuderia Corsa with Ed Carpenter Racing car. Ed Jones, I think, had a big-time sophomore slump, and that wasn't indicative with Chip Ganassi last year of what he's capable of. Again, I believe the Ed Carpenter Racing cars are second place in terms of the best car you can get at Indianapolis. So placing Ed Jones up there, a guy who finished third in his rookie year in the 500, I don't think it's out of the question. In the center, I have Helio Castroneves, the last of the Penske drivers. Helio isn't quite as good of a qualifier as he used to be at Indianapolis, but again, I think the Penske is the best car, the Penske Chevys, and so I think he's pretty much a lock for the Fast 9. And then on the outside, I've got a second Honda in the Fast 9. Again, that may be a bit of a stretch, to be honest with you, but it's kind of lining up with the trends of last year. There were two Hondas in the Fast 9, Sebastian Bourdais and Scott Dixon. Once again, I've got Scott Dixon in the Fast 9. He's so good at Indianapolis, so quick. And it's actually surprising that Scott Dixon only has one Indianapolis 500 win. And once we get past this Fast 9, this is where things, all bets are off. I think the top 9 will absolutely be the kind of drivers, and I think these top 9 in specifically are pretty much locks to avoid bump day. Pretty much everybody from positions 10 to 36, I think it's going to be one of the tightest fields in history. So how do I think it shakes up? Here we go on to row 4. Row 4 is entirely Honda, and like I was talking about, the close nature of this field, I think the center of the field, Honda has depth. They don't necessarily have the speed, but you're going to be seeing a lot of Hondas kind of in this midfield battle because of how strong some of the teams and drivers are. Inside, I've got Alexander Rossi. Now, many people will point out that he qualified 32nd last year, but many people forget that the reason he was back there was a flat tire, and had that not happened, he almost certainly would have been about 10th on the starting grid. In the middle, I've got Graham Rahal. Traditionally not a great qualifier, but again, it looks like the Rahal Hondas are particularly fast this year. So I think Graham will be able to figure it out. I think he'll be high up the grid, and then you've got to look at him as a big-time potential dark horse for the victory if things go his way. And on the outside, I've got Marco Andretti. Now, he's very inconsistent. Some years he's at the front of the field, some years he's at the back of the field. So putting him about mid-pack seems about right. I think this was about where he qualified last year. So I think Marco's got a decent handle on this Universal Aero Kit. So I think he will be right about where he is in my prediction. Row 5, another whole Honda row, and the first of the rookies appears as we've got Colton Herta on the inside. Row number 6, I think Colton has been spectacular this season. He was the fastest in the all-rookie, all-skate session, and one of the fastest drivers overall at the Indy 500 test. And of course, he's also a Freedom 100 winner, and he's got that silent confidence. He's a cold-blooded killer in the race car. I think he will qualify very well and the top of the rookies. In the middle, we've got Ryan Hunter-Reay. Usually a pretty good qualifier, but it's just so hard. I don't think, again, the Hondas aren't the greatest. And also, despite what I have right now with a lot of Andretti associated cars up at the front, I don't think the Andrettis are really going to have the advantage that we've seen in the last couple of years. They certainly didn't have it in 2018, and I think that trend is going to continue. On the outside, we've got Sebastian Bourdais. They have been very good in qualifying in the last 2 years, or at least had very fast cars the last 2 years with Dale Coyne Racing. But I just don't see them qualifying much higher than this in this year with as deep as the field is. We move on to row 6, and this is a rookie-heavy row. I think I said row 5 was row 6, but just ignore that. This is row 6, and we've got Felix Rosenqvist in the second Ganassi car on the inside. I don't think there's much else to say. Rosenqvist is incredibly talented, but again, I think I'm more liable to put experienced drivers ahead of him. I don't think he's Fast 9 material, especially because I think Dixon is only going to kind of slip in on the skin of his teeth. And of course, Dixon's one of the best there's ever been. In the middle, we've got the first of the Carlin Chevys. And yes, I'm picking Patricio O'Ward to out-qualify his pseudo teammate, Fernando Alonso. Again, Pato O'Ward is one of the hottest prospects in IndyCar racing. I think he is an extremely talented driver. I think he could qualify this high and maybe even be a threat on race day. And then on the outside is Tony Kanaan. Now, the AJ Foyt cars were pretty fast last year, but it just looks like they're struggling a little bit. And the only reason I ranked Kanaan this high is just because of that experience factor. I think he may be able to pull up a bad car by its bootstraps a lot more than a lot of his contemporaries that are going to be further down the field. So I ranked him that high solely on his experience. We'll head off row 7 with Santucci Ferrucci, or Santino Ferrucci, the second Dale Coyne car, but not the last Dale Coyne car. He's been pretty fast. In a lot of ways, he's out-qualified Bourdais in a lot of races thus far this season. But again, experience on ovals is so important. Ferrucci has none. I think he will pick it up pretty quickly, so again, I have him pretty safely in the field, but again, I don't think he's going to be that high up the field. Here comes with some controversy. Fernando Alonso in the middle of the row. I do think there's a possibility he could be bumped if he has a really bad month, but again, I think it's highly unlikely that Alonso could go home. I think he's not going to have a great month, though, with the Carlin Racing McLaren operation. It just doesn't have that feeling like he's going to be really in contention, at least until race day. Race day could be a completely different thing because, of course, we know how good Fernando Alonso is, but does he have the experience to pull a bad car up to the front of the grid on an oval? That will be one of the things we have to look at. And on the outside, we've got Connor Daly for the first time in an Andretti Autosport car. This was tough because he's never been in a car this good, and I was liable to rank him higher because of that. But again, I think he's got an Indy-only team, Indy-only crew, and, you know, he's the 5th Andretti car. I was just a little bit hesitant to really rank him up there ahead of, like, the Rahals or the Rossies. It was a little too tough. So we've got Connor Daly back here. Inside row 8, we've got Matheus Leist. He qualified really well last year, actually exceeded a lot of expectations. He's won the Freedom 100 before, so he knows how to get around the Indianapolis 500, or the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and also the Indianapolis 500, because he didn't crash last year. Had a pretty solid day as a rookie. But again, the Foyt cars just don't instill me with a whole lot of confidence, so he is where he is. In the middle is J.R. Hildebrand with his Dan Gurney, Brian Reinbold tribute. Brian Reinbold, of course, an Indy-only team. So, again, I think their limited track time, their limited crew time is going to hamper them quite a bit. But Hildebrand is a pretty easy guess that he will get into the field. Then we've got the third of the Carlin cars, Charlie Kimball. I think Charlie is a pretty good qualifier, but it looks like Carlin's struggling a bit this year. So I think he's safe in the field, but it's not going to be a particularly spectacular entry into this year's 500. Row 9 is probably going to stir some people up. We've got the first of the Sam Schmidt associated cars with the Michael Shank or Meyer Shank Racing number 60 for Jack Harvey, former Freedom 100 winner, another one of those in the field. He's on the inside. He didn't qualify all that well last year. In fact, he was in the last row. But Michael Shank bought a brand new car for him specifically for the ovals. So I think they're going to figure it out. Jack Harvey's a pretty good shoe. I think they will be all right. In the center is James Davison. James Davison in the third Dale Coyne car with the Belardi Bird Hollinger organization that associated with AJ Foyt last year, just squeaked in on the skin of their teeth. But I think the Dale Coyne car is a lot better than a Foyt car, especially when you get to that third and fourth string on a team. So I think Davison, he's a pretty good qualifier. He should get in pretty easily. And then on the outside, he's in the show, but he's not very far up, James Hinchcliffe. And I know I'm going to have to explain this one. I just don't see a whole lot of improvement from that team from last year. I think the improvement is that they will make the show this year as opposed to last year. But their oval program isn't that great, and I know Hinchcliffe is a former pole sitter, but it really seems to me like the lack of Robert Wickens this year is going to hurt them, especially on the ovals. Wickens definitely had the ovals figured out before his untimely accident. He really had that program steaming along, and losing a driver like that from their team, at least for the present moment, is definitely going to hamper them. It's not going to hamper them to the point of getting bumped, I don't think, but I don't think they're going to be Fast 9 contenders by any stretch of the imagination. Getting down to crunch time now, row 10. These are the guys who are going to start scraping into the field by the skin of their teeth, and I think any of them could possibly be bumped. You just never know, but I think these guys are going to make it in. First of all, on the inside, I've got Kyle Kaiser for Juncos Racing. They made the field pretty easily last year. They've got a Chevy engine, so that both works in their favor. But what's not working in their favor is that they didn't have an oval race to start the season like they did last year at Phoenix. There wasn't an oval to show up and race at. And unfortunately, I don't think they've even been on track with an oval testing program at all this year. So I think that's going to hurt them a little bit, but it's not going to hurt them enough to get them bumped. I think Kyle Kaiser is talented enough, and they will be able to make it into the show. In the center is Sage Karam. Brian Reinbold, generally not a great qualifying team. Sage Karam himself isn't really a great qualifier, but he's good in the race. I think he was up to 5th last year in the race, so I would expect a similar performance from him. And then on the outside, we've got Jordan King in the third Rahal Letterman Lanigan car. This was one that I really struggled with. Ultimately put King in the field because I think the Rahal cars are going to be that strong that maybe he won't have to hang it out quite as much as some other drivers would to make it to the field, but his lack of oval experience definitely makes him one of the guys that I would look for to potentially be bumped. All right, here we go. Row 11. These are the last 3 drivers I think are going to make it in to the Indianapolis 500 field this year. On the inside, we've got Oriol Servia for Schmidt-Peterson, Aero Schmidt-Peterson Motorsports. That's a long team name to say. Yes, the driver who is still not officially announced on the entry list, but was testing with the team, so you've got to expect that he will get the nod. He's off and on qualifications. Some years he's really good, some years he's not so good. He's always good in the race, kind of like Sage Karam earlier. But I don't think the Schmidt team has the oval program nailed down as well as they'd like. So from my prediction, I think looking at kind of historically how Servia has done in cars that aren't necessarily the best, he's usually in the back 3 rows, and with the level of competition this year, I think you're going to see him near the back in the race. Who knows? But Oriol Servia on the back row. In the middle, we've got the 4th Carlin Racing entry. We have got Max Chilton. Max Chilton is pretty good around Indianapolis. I don't think he's a great setup guy, and I don't think he's necessarily a guy who's really going to lay it on the line to gain a mile an hour or 2. I do think he's going to sneak in because I think his teammates are strong enough setup guys, Alonso, Award, and Kimball, to get that car up to speed and get him in the show. Final position. Before I say the final position, because I think some of you have already figured out who it's come down to, and you're probably going to be surprised who I picked. I would like to tell you what I think the bump speed is going to be. And I think it's, again, going to kind of say a lot of how tight this field and how competitive this field is going to be. I think it's going to go up about a mile an hour from last year. Last year it was like 224.3. I think it's going to be, to get in the show, 225.497 miles an hour. 225 and a half to get in the show. That's what I think it's going to take. And the person who's going to do that is going to be Marcus Ericsson. Yep, I think Marcus Ericsson will be the 33rd starter. I think he'll get into the show. I think he'll bump his way in right at the end. I don't think he looks as confident on the ovals as I would like him to, but he's a Formula One driver. I think he'll figure it out. But Schmidt, along with a new driver, not a lot of oval experience, I think Ericsson is definitely a candidate for the bubble, but would he get knocked out? I don't think he will. I think Schmidt will get all their cars in, because if they don't, we're going to have to hear that narrative for a whole nother year. So if you're good at mental math, you've probably already figured out who the shocking bump in my mind will be. But I'll talk about a couple of drivers that I feel like I don't want to say they're gimmies to get bumped, but looking at the field and looking at what these two teams are up against, I think that saying that I think Ben Hanley for Dragon Speed, as well as Pippa Man for Hollinger, or not Hollinger Racing, for the Clausen team, for Clausen Racing, Clausen Marshall Racing, I feel like they are the two teams that are really going to struggle to get in. And it's nothing against those teams, and boy, I hope they both make it, to be honest with you. I hope they both bump out a Penske or Ganassi car, to be honest with you. That would be awesome. They do have the best combination. The Chevrolet, I think, is the most powerful motor. And again, I did an entire video kind of defending Pippa Man, thinking that she could make the race. But looking at the pace of the cars that are coming out of her shop, the two Foyt cars, they're not quite there. And even if they get a ton of setup help from Tony Kanaan, I just don't see that team making the show. It's just, the field is too good this year. And that would be a shame, because I really want to see that team succeed. Dragon Speed, I'm not as worried about in terms of their future hinging on this race. I think they know what they're up against. Ben Hanley, again, no oval experience. This is something that I really value heavily. And a guy with no oval experience, with, you know, a small team that they themselves don't have a lot of experience with Indy cars, man, that is an uphill battle. It's an uphill battle. And by the way, I think both of those teams could very well make the show. It's almost like if you put them in the show, they're definitely a number 16 seed upsetting a number 1 seed, no doubt about it. But I just didn't feel confident enough to put them in at the expense of anybody else, considering who I bumped out of the field. I guess we'll stop being around the bush. I believe the full-timer, the shock of this year that will go home, is Zach Veach. Yep, an Andretti car. Yep, Andretti's been one of the people complaining about the lack of locked-in spots. And, you know, it's not a vengeful thing. I think I'm looking at statistics, and I'm looking at what has happened this season with Zach Veach. He's qualified twice for the race before, 2017, 2018, and he's not a great qualifier at the Speedway. He's 17, he was 32nd, and last year he was 25th. And he's had such an up and down year. I think his confidence is a little bit hurt. If I was picking a full-time driver, it was between him and Ericsson, and I would almost lean toward Veach for some reason not making the show. Again, Andretti is going to have a lot of eggs in a lot of different baskets, a lot of different drivers they're going to be trying to get in the show. And again, I think it's going to be so tight in that 10 to 33 range. Any small mistake could knock a guy out that you would be shocked that they would be. And again, I think looking at the full-time drivers, because I do still maintain that one full-time driver is not going to make the show. Who it's going to be, that's the thing that's really going to be the head scratcher. But again, I think it's going to be Veach. I hate to do it. I think you hate to send anybody home, even hypothetically, but that would be my choice. So going home, just to reiterate, Pippa Man, Ben Hanley, Zach Veach. So that's my grid of 33 starters for this year's Indianapolis 500. How off base do you think I am? Do you think I'm right on the money? Let me know down in the comments, and also let me know what your 33 are. Who's getting bumped? Who's going to be on the pole? What's the pole speed going to be? What's the bump speed going to be? There's so much information to speculate about. It's always very exciting, and who knows what's going to happen in qualifying. This could be totally wrong, and Fernando, Elio, and Dixon could all go home. Who knows? But that's what's so fun about the Indy 500. Nobody's locked in, nobody's safe, and anything could happen. So thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube. Subscribe for more IndyCar and Indy 500 month content, and I will see you in the next video.